Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I am honored to be joining Senator Schatz, who has been working with Senator Whitehouse and Senator Boxer to put together this very, very important discussion, very important evening. But while we're discussing climate change, first I thought that I would talk a little bit about baseball. And I would like to basically say to the Senate that something very funny happened in baseball. Because from 1920 all the way through the entire modern baseball history, the average number of players who hit more than 40 home runs in a season was 3. That's all. Babe Ruth, Hank Greenberg, Willie Mays, Mickey Mantle, Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio. No matter who was playing baseball in the United States, the average number of home runs was 3.3 who made it over 40 home runs in a season. Then something very strange started to happen. All of a sudden, there was a dramatic spike in the number of players who could hit more than 40 home runs. In 1996, it went up to 17 players all of a sudden, with an average was only 3.3 who hit more than 40 home runs. And year after year, the same thing was occurring. And then it occurred to someone, maybe they're injecting these players with steroids. Now, some people said, no, the ballparks are getting smaller. Maybe they're corking the bats. Maybe they're juicing the baseball. But no, it turned out that they were injecting steroids into baseball players. And all of a sudden, the average of 3.3 players averaging more than 40 home runs in a season had spiked to 3 and 4 times that, until Major League Baseball decided that they were going to test for steroids. And a very strange thing started to happen. The average number of players hitting more than 40 home runs went right back down to the traditional average. Well, ladies and gentlemen, NOAA has the same kind of a chart for our climate. NOAA has been able to do the calculation going back to 1880 of what the average temperature is on the planet. And as you can see, it stayed at a pretty current level until all of a sudden, especially beginning in the 1970s, a dramatic spike. And as we all know, 20 of the warmest 30 years ever registered have occurred in the last 30 years. As we all know, the 4th warmest year of all time ever recorded occurred just last year, 2013. But we haven't applied the same steroids equivalent tests for this change in temperature. But we have a pretty good idea of what's happened because scientists all across the United States agree on this issue, that it is man-made, that is, that the chemicals that we are putting into the atmosphere are causing the same kind of spike that the chemicals that ball players were putting into their bodies were causing in the dramatic rise in the number of home runs that were being hit in Major League Baseball. So this is just basically an obvious correlation between what we're doing as human beings and the impact on the world in which we live. And just as those home runs went up when the players were juiced, so too has the temperature on the planet. And the same distortion that occurred in our national pastime is now occurring on our planet. But, ladies and gentlemen, the planet is running a fever, but there are no emergency rooms for planets. There are no hospitals to go to. We have to engage in preventative care. We have to put in place the measures that reduce dramatically the likelihood that we are going to see the worst catastrophic effects of this dangerous warming of our planet. And if you're still skeptical, then perhaps the findings of another skeptic, Dr. Richard Muller and his colleagues at the Berkeley Earth Surface Temperature Project will reassure you. Let me quote from Dr. Muller's July 2012 New York Times column entitled "The Conversion of a Climate Change Skeptic." Here's what he said. He said, "Our results show that the average temperature of the Earth's land has risen by 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit over the last 250 years, including an increase of 1.5 degrees over the most recent 50 years. Moreover, it appears likely that essentially all of this increase results from the human emissions of greenhouse gases." Now, our current understanding of human influence on climate change rests on 150 years of wide-ranging scientific observations and research, and it is informed by what we see today with our own eyes, measured by our own hands. Global temperatures are warming, glaciers are melting, sea levels are rising, extreme downpours are increasing, the ocean is becoming more acidic. But climate change is more than just numbers in a scientist's book. In my home state of Massachusetts, it is having tangible impacts now. My state, Massachusetts, loses an average of 49 football fields of land to rising sea levels each and every year. Rates of sea level rise from North Carolina to Massachusetts are 2 to 4 times faster than the global average. Extreme downpours and snowfalls in New England have increased by 85% since 1948. According to scientists at the University of New Hampshire, New England winters have become 4 degrees warmer on average since 1965. In other words, we now have in New England the same weather that Philadelphia had in 1965. We're 4 degrees warmer than we were in New England in 1965. We have Philadelphia's weather. Thank God in Boston we don't have their athletic teams, but we do have their weather. And it's getting warmer, and it's getting warmer. In Massachusetts and most of New England, spring is sprung 5 days earlier on average than it did in the latter part of the 20th century. Around the iconic Walden Pond, plants now flower 10 days earlier on average than they did in the 1850s compared to the careful records kept by Henry David Thoreau. Our iconic cod have been moving north as ocean temperatures warm. Cod need cold water. As the ocean warms, they're moving further and further north. Cape Cod is our iconic beachfront, oceanfront, fishing front in our state. The cod are moving north and away from our state because they need cold water. The coastal communities that depend upon them are being affected negatively by the absence of these fish. And scientists are just beginning to understand the consequences of the increasingly acidic ocean on scallops, lobsters, plankton, which are the base of the food chain in the Gulf of Maine. And as Dr. Aaron Bernstein from the Harvard School of Public Health has written, climate change is a health threat, no less consequential than cigarette smoking. Increasing temperatures increase the risk for bad air days, in turn increasing the risk of asthma attacks and worse for people with lung disease. Here are just 2 stories. Rachel from Cambridge, Sylvia from Amherst, where their moms talk about the impact of pollution on the health of their children. I think it's important for us to understand that asthma and other illnesses that are created by pollution are preventable, but only if we here in the Senate put in place the policies that make it possible for us to reduce the risk to these young people all across our country. And I strongly support all of the efforts that the members are putting together here tonight to focus upon this issue, because it's not just the planet, it is the children of the planet who are negatively impacted by all of this additional pollution. Left unchecked, the impacts of climate change will only become worse in the future. An analysis by the Sandia National Lab found that changes in rainfall alone could cost Massachusetts $8 billion in GDP and nearly 38,000 jobs between 2010 and 2050. That's just Massachusetts alone. New England could see a $22 billion hit to our GDP and almost 100,000 jobs lost from changing precipitation patterns. Sea level rise will also threaten coastal communities where a third of Massachusetts' population lives. The seas are getting hotter. They are getting higher. And those hotter, higher seas are making storms more damaging. Storm surges on top of sea level rise could cause hundreds of billions in damages to cities on the Massachusetts coast during the next decade. In 1775, Paul Revere warned Massachusetts revolutionaries of an invasion coming from the sea. With climate change, Boston and the Bay State could now face an invasion of the sea itself in Massachusetts and all across New England. As sea levels rise and storms become more severe, many of Boston's best-known landmarks will be threatened, including Faneuil Hall and Quincy Market, North Station, Fan Pier, Copley Church, John Hancock Tower, the Public Garden. The Back Bay will revert to its original personality as a bay. We just have to be realistic about this. The threats are there. The scientists are warning us. This can happen. There, but for the grace of God, and a few degrees in Hurricane Sandy would have been what the city of Boston looked like. We've been warned. Anyone who hasn't been hit by a Hurricane Sandy yet has been warned. It's coming, and it will be worse than Hurricane Sandy. By the end of the century, Massachusetts summers could feel like North Carolina's, not Philadelphia's, but by the end of the century, the temperatures are just going to keep warming. By 2100, Maine could be the only state in New England that still has a skiing industry. That is how rapidly the snows are disappearing. The economic impact of climate change isn't confined to New England because we already feel the cost of climate disruption. The GAO added climate change to its 2013 high-risk list based on, in large part, on two reports they did at my request. GAO found that climate change presents a significant financial risk to the federal government. GAO could just have easily said it presents a significant financial risk for all of America. As daunting as the impacts of climate change are, the good news is we have the solutions to address it. We can generate good jobs in America that are also good for saving all of creation. Wind and solar, we have there a tale of two tax policies. Here's the solar industry in the United States. Back in 2007, there was a production of perhaps 200 megawatts of electricity from solar. It was at the dawn of the solar industry. It wasn't as though the sun hadn't been up there, or that the technologies that did not exist, or that could not have been created in order to capture it, but the tax policies were not there. And so, in 2008, the Congress passed a law which added an 8-year tax incentive for the solar industry. And you can see what happened to this industry that had been denigrated for years, up to last year, where 5,000 new megawatts, think of 5 Seabrook nuclear power plants of electricity just generated by solar in 1 year. And that tax break stays on the books all the way until the end of 2016. And by the end of 2016, there is an expectation that 10,000 new megawatts of solar will be installed in the United States in 1 year. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 year, if we keep those tax breaks on the books, but you can see what happens when there's a consistent, predictable tax policy on the books. Now let me show you another tax policy. Let me show you another tax policy. And this is the tax policy for the wind industry. The wind industry hasn't had the same good fortune which the solar industry has had. Every time there's a tax policy that's put on the books, wind starts to build upwards of 2,000 megawatts in 2001. But then the tax policy evaporated and it collapsed as an industry. We put it back on the books. It went back up to 2,000 megawatts. It expired at the end of that year. It collapsed again. But then, 2005, we put a policy on the books that began to see the kind of installation of wind that we knew was possible from the beginning of time. We all knew it. We all knew that Dutch were right with those windmills. We all knew there was something to it, but there was no tax policy that was consistent. Until we reached 2012, when unbelievably 13,000 new megawatts of wind were installed in the United States. 13 nuclear power plants. There's only 100,000 megawatts of nuclear power in the United States after 70 years of tax subsidies. Look what happened with wind in 1 year, 13,000 megawatts. But then it expired and it collapsed down to only 2,000 megawatts in the year 2013. That's our challenge, ladies and gentlemen. If we give the same kind of predictable tax treatment, the same kind of policy treatment to these renewable energy resources that we've given to the oil industry over the last century, they've got a lot to worry about. And by the way, you don't have to worry about the oil industry or the gas industry. Their tax policies stay just the same. Through good times and bad for the oil industry, they keep the same tax breaks on the books. They know they can rely upon them. They know, those two industries, that $7 billion in tax breaks that they rely upon is going to be there year after year after year. Now, let's talk about what else can happen in other industries. Let's talk about the automotive industry. The gentlelady, the senator from Minnesota, she just talked about the fuel economy standards that we put on the books. Well, look what's happened since the fuel economy standards were put on the books and implemented by Barack Obama, because George Bush did not implement them. Now, I'm proud to be the House author of those fuel economy standards, but it took Barack Obama to put them on the books. 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2026. And look what has happened. We're now up nearing 600,000 hybrids, plug-in vehicles, and all-electric vehicles per year. It's just skyrocketing. Ford, General Motors, Chrysler, they're reporting record profits, record sales. People will buy them. You've got to create the policy, though, in the country. By the way, that one policy, fuel economy standards, that was put on the books 2007 in this body and over in the House of Representatives, it backs out 4 million barrels of oil per day that we import into our country by the year 2040, when all these standards that we put on the books are finally implemented. How much is that? We import 3 million barrels of oil a day from the Persian Gulf. The United States does that. 3 million barrels a day. We're backing out 4 million just by putting together a policy that incentivizes the industry to invest in the kinds of technologies that Americans want to buy and citizens around this planet want to buy. Wind, solar, hybrids, all-electric vehicles. It's all there. It is what we can do in order to create jobs and, at the same time, save the planet. And I'll give you some other numbers because I think they're really relevant. The coal industry now has 80,000 employees. The wind industry has 80,000 employees in the United States, huh? You saw how low it was in 2007? Well, 80,000 employees now. The solar industry has 142,000 employees. Coal only has 80,000. You saw what happened. From the moment that predictable tax policy went on the books until today. and it is continuing to go off the charts, but we know there's going to be people who are going to be out here fighting to take away those tax breaks, to compromise the ability of the EPA or the Department of Transportation to keep those standards on the books. Now, back in the 1990s, I was the chairman of the Telecommunications Committee in the House of Representatives, and I was able to put 3 bills on the books. One created the 18-inch satellite dish. Another one created the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th cell phone license. That's what drove the price of a phone call that people make from 50 cents a minute down to 10 cents a minute. 1996 is the year you started to have one of these devices in your pocket. At 50 cents a minute, you didn't have one. And by the way, it was the size of a brick before that bill passed. And finally, the 1996 Telecommunications Act. That's what moved us from analog to digital. That's what moved us from narrowband to broadband. That's what created this revolution of Google, eBay, Amazon, Hulu, YouTube, Facebook. All that happened because of policies that were created on the House and the Senate and signed by the President, and unleashed $1 trillion worth of private sector investment. And it revolutionized villages in Africa and Asia to here square. Those are our technologies. We invented them and then sold them around the world. Well, we have the same kind of economic possibility for renewable energy, for new energy technologies, as we have in the telecommunications sector, and we have a chance to cap another $1 to $2 trillion worth of investment in the private sector. Now, let's move on to our nation's carbon emissions from energy from fossil fuels. The total amount of greenhouse gases in our country from energy sources fell from 2005 to 2012 by 12%. We installed more wind, more solar, fuel-efficient vehicles, we got more efficient, and we reduced our coal use. 2005 to 2012. But in 2013, that reversed. And the U.S. carbon dioxide emissions from energy sources increased by 2% in 2013. What happened? The price of natural gas increased in 2013 by 27%. As a result, U.S. electric utilities returned to burning more coal and using less natural gas. U.S. energy-related carbon emissions are still 10% below 2005 levels, but to keep driving them down, we need to keep the price of natural gas low and continue to drive the deployment of wind and solar up. For the oil and gas industry, the crisis in the Ukraine is an opportunity to throw open the doors to unrestrained exports of American natural gas. But the notion that gas exports will help Ukraine is an illusion. It's a talisman, some lucky charm. This is a simple matter of geoeconomics, geology, and geopolitics. We've already approved 5 export terminals that could send 4 trillion cubic feet of natural gas abroad every year. That's nearly equal to all the gas consumed by every home in America. Just take that slice of the pie, and we're going to export all that natural gas. That's twice as much as the Ukraine consumes every year. Exporting natural gas could raise U.S. prices upwards of 50% and create an energy tax of $62 billion each year on American consumers and businesses, and it will put the coal industry back in business, because coal will then be less expensive than natural gas. And our ability to meet this goal of reducing greenhouse gases will be replaced by a policy to export all the natural gas that we can get to the ports of the United States. And the lower our supply is, the higher the price is going to be for the remaining natural gas within our boundaries. And the Energy Information Agency says that just with the terminals that are now being proposed, it's a 52% increase in the price for gas here. We saw it last year. When gas went up 27%, coal replaced natural gas, and our emissions went up, not down. So we just have to be realistic about this whole debate in the Ukraine, about what it means for us in handling this issue. By the way, it's what's been leading to manufacturers returning to the United States. It's what is a big part of why there is a move towards natural gas vehicles, which also back out imported oil. But the higher natural gas prices are, is the more we undermine our ability to make real progress on climate change, on manufacturing, on natural gas vehicles, on utilities moving from coal over to natural gas. That is our challenge as a people. And then finally, we, ladies and gentlemen, we are the leader, not the laggards. The whole world is looking at us. So much of that CO2 is red, white, and blue. And they look to us to be the leader. You started your industrial revolution in the 19th century, they say to us. If you want us to reduce our greenhouse gases, you reduce yours. And so we cannot abdicate this responsibility. Last week I had a conference down here in Washington, Globe. These are 100 legislators from around the world who came here, the key players on energy and environment in each country in the world. We had a conference over in the Russell building. And each of these legislators said that they are looking to us for the leadership. 500 new laws have been put on the books over the last 15 years in these countries on climate change. But the question comes to us, what are you going to do this year, next year, the year after on these issues? Because their countries are even more vulnerable than our countries are. They do not have the resources which our country has. And so that is our opportunity. Henry Waxman and I, we built a coalition of utilities, of businesses, of labor, of faith, environmental groups, concerned citizens in 2009. The pieces are still out there, my colleagues. We can do it again, but we are going to need everyone's help. Recently, the books of Massachusetts author and national treasure, Dr. Seuss, have been popular and read on the Senate floor. I wish I had time to read the entirety of his environmental classic, The Lorax. But since there are so many senators who want to talk about the impacts of climate change and the benefits addressing it will bring our country, I will just have to close with this short portion. Here's what it says. But now, says the Onceler, now that you're here, the word of the Lorax seems perfectly clear. Unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So to my colleagues here in the Senate, and everyone watching and following tonight, thank you for caring a whole awful lot. Because it's not for us, it's for all the subsequent generations of this country and this planet that are looking to this chamber for the leadership. And we are going to make things better from tonight onward. This is a moment. The science is clear. The economics is clear. And now the politics is clear. We're going to have a big fight about this in 2014 because future generations are going to look back and know that this Senate stood up and we had the debate on the most important issue facing this planet. Madam President, I yield back the balance of my time.